I caught my husband with my son's wife. My son whispered, "Mom, I already know." The wineglass slipped from my hand and shattered across the kitchen floor. Red wine spread between the broken glass like blood while my husband froze halfway down the hallway, his shirt half buttoned, panic flashing across his face. But it wasn't him that destroyed me. It was the woman standing behind him. My son's wife, Emily. Her lipstick was smudged, her hair was messy, and the moment our eyes met, she stepped backward like she'd seen a ghost. For a second, nobody spoke. Not me, not Richard, not Emily. The only sound was Frank Sinatra playing softly in the dining room while guests laughed outside on the patio, completely unaware that our entire family had just exploded inside our kitchen. It was Thanksgiving. 27 people were in my backyard. And my husband had been sleeping with my daughter-in-law. Richard finally found his voice first. "Claire, don't." My voice came out shaking. Emily burst into tears immediately. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her and suddenly remembered helping her zip her wedding dress 3 years earlier. I remembered holding her hand when she miscarried last winter. I remembered defending her when my sisters said she seemed distant. And all that time, I pressed my hand against the counter because my knees nearly gave out. Richard stepped toward me carefully. "Please let me explain." "Explain what?" I whispered. "How long?" Neither answered. That was answer enough. Then footsteps approached from the hallway. My son Daniel walked in carrying a tray of desserts, smiling casually. "Mom, where do you?" He stopped instantly. His eyes moved from me, to Emily, to Richard. The room turned silent again. I expected rage, screaming, confusion. Instead, Daniel slowly placed the tray on the counter. Then he walked over to me quietly, and whispered the words that changed everything. "Mom, I already know." I stared at him in disbelief. "What?" His eyes looked exhausted, older somehow. "I found out 2 months ago." The world tilted. "You knew." My voice cracked. "And you said nothing." Daniel swallowed hard. "I didn't know how." Behind him, Emily started sobbing harder. Richard looked ashamed for the first time in years. I grabbed the edge of the counter. 2 months. Daniel nodded painfully. Then he looked at his father. "I kept hoping you'd tell her yourself." Richard couldn't even meet his eyes. That hurt Daniel more than the affair itself. I could see it. Because betrayal from a spouse breaks your heart. Betrayal from a parent rewrites your entire life. Outside, laughter erupted from the backyard. Someone started singing along to the music. Meanwhile inside, my family was collapsing in complete silence. I looked at Daniel carefully. "When did this start?" Emily covered her face immediately. Richard whispered, "Last year." Last year. Nearly 12 months. 12 months of family dinners. Birthdays. Sunday barbecues. Christmas photos. All fake. Suddenly I felt sick. I turned toward the sink and tried breathing through the nausea. Daniel gently touched my shoulder. And somehow that made me cry harder. Because my son, the one who should have been breaking apart himself, was comforting me instead. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "No," I choked out. "No, sweetheart, I'm sorry. I wasn't even sure what I meant. Sorry for not noticing. Sorry for raising a man capable of this. Sorry that my son had been carrying this pain alone." Richard finally stepped forward. "Claire, please, let's not do this tonight." I slowly turned toward him. Not do this tonight. 27 years of marriage. Destroyed. And he was worried about Thanksgiving dinner. Something inside me went cold. "You invited everyone here," I said quietly. Knowing this secret was sitting at the table with us. His face tightened. "It wasn't supposed to happen." Emily let out a broken laugh through tears. "That's your excuse." Richard snapped suddenly. "You're not innocent either." Daniel flinched like he'd been punched. And that was the moment I stopped seeing Richard as my husband. Because decent people can make terrible mistakes. But cruel people weaponize pain to protect themselves. Daniel stepped between them immediately. "Stop." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried years of disappointment. "I'm tired," he said quietly. "I'm just tired." Nobody moved. Then he looked at Emily. "Tell her." Emily's entire body trembled. "Richard and I." She wiped tears helplessly. "It started after the miscarriage." I remembered that time clearly. Emily had fallen into depression afterward. Daniel worked long hospital shifts as a resident doctor, barely sleeping. Richard had spent more time talking to her, checking on her. I thought he was being supportive. God, I thought he was helping her heal. Emily covered her mouth while crying. I felt invisible, she whispered. Daniel was grieving too, but he buried himself in work. Richard listened to me. Daniel closed his eyes painfully. I know I wasn't there enough. No, Emily cried. That's not your fault. Richard tried stepping closer again. Claire, this got out of control. Out of control, like it was some accidental fire. Not hundreds of deliberate choices. I looked at the man I'd loved since college. The man who held my hand through cancer scares. Who danced with me in the kitchen at midnight. Who promised me forever. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. You can sleep beside someone for 30 years and still not truly know them. Outside, my granddaughter Sophie knocked on the kitchen door. She was 6 years old. Daniel and Emily's adopted daughter. Tiny curls. Missing front tooth. Heart too pure for this world. Grandma, she called innocently. Can we eat pie now? Everyone froze. Emily immediately turned away to hide her tears. Daniel wiped his face quickly. And I walked to the door. When I opened it, Sophie smiled brightly. Then her expression changed. Why are you crying? Children always know. I crouched slowly despite my shaking legs. Just grown-up stuff, sweetheart. She studied me carefully for a moment. Then wrapped her tiny arms around my neck. And somehow, that simple little hug shattered what remained of my composure. I held her tightly while silently crying into her hair. Because in the middle of betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, this little girl still trusted us completely. Daniel came over quietly. I'll take her upstairs. I nodded. But before he could leave, Sophie looked back at me seriously. You still coming to my school play tomorrow? My throat tightened. Of course I am. She smiled immediately, like she never doubted it. That smile saved something inside me. After Daniel took her upstairs, silence filled the kitchen again. I stood up slowly and faced Richard. You need to leave. His eyes widened. Claire, tonight, please don't do this in front of everyone. I almost laughed. The irony was unbelievable. You should have thought about that before sleeping with your son's wife. Emily burst into fresh tears. Richard rubbed his forehead. I made a mistake. No, Daniel said from the doorway behind us. We turned. He'd come back downstairs alone. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. His voice trembled. This was betrayal. Richard opened his mouth but Daniel cut him off. You looked me in the eye every day. That landed harder than shouting ever could. Because Daniel wasn't angry anymore. He was wounded. Deeply. And Richard finally saw it. For the first time all night, genuine shame crossed his face. Then something unexpected happened. Emily walked toward me slowly. I know you hate me. I didn't answer. She nodded through tears. You should. Her voice broke apart. But Claire, after my miscarriage, you were the only person who sat with me every day. You brought food. You stayed when I couldn't stop crying. I stared at her silently. And I repaid you like this. Pain filled her expression so deeply that for one dangerous second, I saw not a villain, but a broken person who destroyed everything around her because she was drowning herself. That didn't excuse it, not even close. But pain rarely creates clean monsters. Mostly, it creates damaged humans making catastrophic choices. Daniel looked at her quietly. Why didn't you just tell me you were unhappy? Emily sobbed harder. Because I was ashamed. He nodded slowly like he'd expected that answer all along. Then he said something that stunned all of us. I don't hate either of you. Richard looked up hopefully. But Daniel continued. I just don't recognize you anymore. The hope disappeared instantly. Outside, one of my cousins knocked on the back door laughing. Everything okay in there? Nobody answered. Finally, I took a deep breath and opened the door halfway. Family emergency, I said calmly. Dinner's over. Confused murmurs spread outside. Within 30 minutes, everyone left. The house became painfully quiet afterward. Emily packed a small bag without speaking much. Richard sat alone in the den staring at the floor like a man who'd detonated his own life. Daniel helped me clean the broken glass from the kitchen. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he quietly said, I was scared to tell you. I looked at him. I know. I thought it would destroy you. I set down the towel slowly. Sweetheart, you don't have to protect me from the truth. His eyes filled immediately. But I wanted to. That nearly broke me again. I touched his face gently like I used to when he was little. You've been carrying too much alone. He looked away. I kept thinking maybe Dad would stop. Maybe Emily would come clean. Maybe I could fix it somehow. That's not your job. A tear slid down his cheek. I know that now. Hours later, after Emily left for her sister's apartment and Richard checked into a hotel, Daniel and I sat on the back porch wrapped in blankets. Cold wind moved through the empty yard. Half-finished wine glasses still sat abandoned on tables. Evidence of the life we had only hours earlier. Daniel stared into the darkness. You know what hurts most? What? He swallowed hard. That Dad always taught me integrity mattered more than anything. I closed my eyes briefly. Because hypocrites don't just betray trust. They poison values. He failed you, I admitted quietly. Daniel nodded once. Then after a long silence, he whispered, I still love him. That honesty made tears burn my eyes again. Because real love doesn't disappear the moment someone disappoints us. Sometimes that's what makes betrayal hurt so much. You still love them despite everything. I leaned my head against his shoulder. You're allowed to love him and still be angry. He let out a shaky breath. I don't know how to move forward. Neither did I. But then headlights appeared across the driveway. A small car pulled up carefully. Daniel frowned. Who's that? A woman stepped out holding several aluminum trays covered in towels. Mrs. Hernandez. Our elderly neighbor. She walked toward the porch gently. I saw everyone leaving early, she said softly. So I figured maybe you two forgot to eat. My chest tightened instantly. She held up the trays awkwardly. Chicken soup, lasagna, and peach cobbler. Daniel suddenly laughed through tears. A broken, exhausted laugh. Mrs. Hernandez looked worried. Oh honey. Before she could finish, Daniel stood and hugged her tightly. And that sweet older woman, who knew absolutely nothing about our disaster, simply held him while he cried. No questions, no gossip, just kindness, pure and immediate. I watched from the porch silently. And something shifted inside me. Because devastation has a way of making you believe darkness is all that exists. Until someone arrives carrying warm food and compassion. Mrs. Hernandez eventually sat with us until nearly midnight. She told silly stories about her late husband. Made Daniel smile for the first time all evening. And before leaving, she squeezed my hand gently. Families break, she said softly. But hearts heal slower when people heal alone. After she left, Daniel looked at me quietly. She's a good person. I nodded. So are you. He stared down at his hands. I don't feel like it right now. I thought about the way he protected me earlier despite his own pain. The way he still refused to speak cruelly even after unimaginable betrayal. The way he held compassion without losing his boundaries. And I realized something important. Richard may have failed as a father tonight. But somehow, despite everything, Daniel had become a remarkable man anyway.